The hall was the size of a small city. That was the first thing Darian Voss noticed when the doors opened. Not the carved stone columns that ran 30 meters to the ceiling. Not the banners in colors that had no human names. Not the hundreds of Kethal courtiers arranged in precise, silent rows like an army that had learned to stand still. The size. He had read the architectural surveys. He had studied the blueprints. He had even walked a scale model back on the Earth station, pacing it out in his socks on a Tuesday morning with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand. None of it prepared him for standing inside the real thing and feeling genuinely, anatomically small. He walked in anyway. His footsteps were the only sound. The Kethal did not shuffle, did not whisper, did not breathe loudly. They watched him cross 200 meters of polished floor with the collective stillness of a species that had been waiting 4,000 years and had gotten very good at it. Darian was 31 years old. He had no military rank. He wore a dark suit that was clean and well-fitted, and entirely unimpressive by any galactic standard. He carried a document case in his left hand and nothing else. He stopped at the designated mark on the floor, a subtle inlay in the stone, just visible if you knew to look, and he stood. The throne was ahead of him, elevated. The queen was already seated. Queen Severath of the Kethal Imperial House was 26 years old and looked like every portrait that had ever been painted of power. She wore the ceremonial white of a first-year reign, which the intelligence briefs had described as symbolic of a crown not yet bloodied. Her posture was the kind that isn't learned so much as grown. She had the particular stillness of someone performing stillness, aware of every camera, every eye, every line in the historical record being written in real time. She was also, Darian had noted in those same intelligence briefs, politically exposed. 4 noble houses were watching her. 3 trade partners were watching the noble houses. 14 other species had observation credentials for this session. Everyone was watching everyone. He bowed. The correct depth, the correct duration. He had practiced it enough times that it felt natural, which was the whole point. The court announcer began the formal introduction in High Kethal, which the translation piece in Darian's ear rendered in clean, flat English. His name, his designation, Earth sector coordinates, the treaty mission classification, standard protocol, running long the way, formal protocol always runs long, filling the air with the sound of its own importance. Darian waited. When the announcer finished, Darian opened his document case and produced the treaty proposal. Single hard copy, per Kethal protocol. He placed it on the presentation stand to his left, a small stone pedestal that existed for exactly this purpose, and he looked up at Severath. On behalf of the people of Earth, he said, and the 31 systems currently under Earth's diplomatic charter, I present this proposal for mutual development and navigational cooperation. We believe the terms are favorable to both parties. We are prepared to discuss any amendment the Imperial Court wishes to raise. He stopped. His voice had been calm, even, not loud, because the hall's acoustics did the work. There was a beat of silence. Severath let it run longer than protocol required. Darian noticed. He kept his face where it was. When she spoke, it was in the old tongue, not High Kethal, which had translation infrastructure, but the original ceremonial language, the one used for declarations of significance. The one the translation piece in his ear struggled with for exactly 2 seconds before it found the matching lexicon and rendered the words in English, flat and clean and precise. We did not expect a child sent where adults were required. The word she used was times Vethalan. It was in the record before the sound had finished leaving her mouth. Every camera, every observer credential, every official transcript automatically time-stamped and distributed to 14 watching species in real time. She had done it perfectly. Public, permanent, humiliating in the specific way that requires no translation. The tone carries, even when the words don't. The court did not react. The Kethal were too disciplined for that. But he felt it, the way you feel, a temperature change, a collective settling, a satisfaction. She had drawn blood, in front of everyone who mattered. That was what they had come to see. Darian looked at her. Not long, not with anger, not with the particular tight expression of a man deciding whether to respond. He looked at her the way a person looks at a road sign, registering, processing, moving on. Then he picked up his document case from the floor beside his foot. He turned. He walked toward the door he had entered through. No statement. No formal closing. No delegation. His two attachés stood near the side wall and exchanged one glance before following, because there was nothing else to do. He left the treaty proposal on the presentation stand. He left the court announcer mid-breath. He left 200 meters of polished floor behind him, and his footsteps were still the only sound, and they did not speed up. The doors opened for him. He walked through. They closed. The silence in the hall after was a different kind of silence than the silence before. Before had been ceremonial. After was the silence of people recalibrating. Severath sat on her throne and felt the shape of her victory. She had won the room. That had been the requirement. The noble houses needed to see her draw a line and enforce it, needed to see that she would not soften for any species that arrived with insufficient gravity. Earth was a minor player, a secondary system. She had said what the court needed to hear her say. She had won. High Arbiter Dorath stood at the edge of the chamber's first tier. He was 73 years old, and had served 3 queens, and outlasted 2 dynasties, and had, in that time, developed an instinct for the specific feeling of a room that had just made a mistake. He watched the doors close behind Darian Voss. He did not move for a long moment. Then he reached into his robe, and produced a small recording device, and pressed the marker that flagged a timestamp for review. He flagged the moment the ambassador had picked up his case. Not the insult. Not the silence. Not the exit. The moment he'd picked up his case, because that was when Dorath had realized the case had never been set down with any expectation of it remaining. It had been rested on the floor the way you rest something you know you'll be picking up again shortly. Severath had performed for her court. The ambassador had performed for something else. Dorath was not yet certain what. He intended to find out very quickly, because in 4,000 years of Kethal imperial history, no visiting ambassador had ever simply left, and nothing that had never happened before was ever, in his experience, a small thing. The official Kethal record classified the session as concluded. Not failed. Not interrupted. Concluded. Someone in the court's administrative branch had made that editorial decision within 40 minutes of the doors closing, and Dorath had read the classification and said nothing, because correcting it would require explaining why it was wrong, and explaining that would require admitting what he suspected. He was not ready to do that in writing yet. Severath held her post-session reception as scheduled. The noble houses attended. The right people said the right things. 2 of the 4 House representatives offered quiet congratulations on her handling of the Earth representative, and she accepted them with the measured warmth of someone who had rehearsed measured warmth. The reception ran 2 hours. The food was excellent. By any observable measure, the court had moved on. Dorath stood near the window for most of it, and watched his queen perform, and thought about the document case. The case had been set down, not placed. There was a difference. A man who intends to stay places his materials. A man running a timed sequence sets them down, where he can find them again in under 2 seconds. He had watched ambassadors arrive in this hall for 40 years. He had watched the nervous ones, and the arrogant ones, and the genuinely brilliant ones. He had watched men and women who believed their cause so deeply they shook with it. He had watched a Tharvan delegate spend 6 hours arguing a single clause. He had never watched anyone leave without speaking. The silence was the thing he kept returning to. Not the insult. Insults he understood. They were tools. Severath had used hers correctly for her audience. The silence was the variable he couldn't price. Because silence from a position of weakness was surrender, and everyone would read it that way, and Severath was right to count it as a win. But silence from a position of patience was something else entirely. He left the reception early, which he never did, and went to his office, which had the best information access in the building, and began reading. 43 species had observation credentials for that morning's session. This was standard. The Kethal Imperial Court was, by galactic convention, an open diplomatic forum for registered observers. You filed the credentials, you received the feed, You watched. It was how smaller species stayed informed without requiring physical presence. The Kethal allowed it because it demonstrated reach. An audience was proof of relevance. Dorath pulled the list of who had been watching. Then he pulled the secondary list, who had initiated contact with Earth's diplomatic infrastructure in the 18 hours since the session ended. He laid them next to each other. He counted 11 names on both lists. 11 species who had watched the session and then, within hours, made contact with Earth's secondary missions, Earth's liaison offices, or Earth's trade registration bureaus. Not dramatic contacts. Not urgent ones. Small things meeting requests. Clarification queries on existing agreements. One species asking about updated navigational relay documentation that they had technically already received 6 months ago. Small things. The kind of small things you do when you want to establish that a line of communication is open without committing to why. He sat with this for a long time. Then he pulled up the file on Earth's infrastructure holdings. The full file, not the diplomatic summary, but the raw technical registry maintained by the sector's navigation authority. Earth controlled the relay architecture across 6 sectors. Physical relay stations, most of them unmanned, scattered across transit corridors that every species in this region used to move ships, send communications, and coordinate trade schedules. Earth had built them quietly over 30 years, during a period when everyone else was focused on military expansion and territorial claims, and the kind of dramatic galactic politics that got recorded in history books. Earth had built infrastructure instead. It was not glamorous. It was not the kind of thing you wrote songs about. It was pipes and signal boosters and maintenance contracts, and the specific unglamorous competence of a species that had decided, at some point, to be useful rather than impressive. The relay network was not a weapon. It was not a threat. It was just present, woven into the way things worked. The way a road is not a weapon until someone closes it. Dorath set the file down. He understood now what 11 species understood. They had watched a man get publicly dismissed by the Kethal crown, walk out without a word, and return to a station from which he managed the navigational infrastructure their ships depended on. They were not contacting Earth because they felt sorry for the ambassador. They were contacting Earth because they were suddenly, sharply aware that Earth could afford to be insulted. Species that could afford to be insulted were not minor players. On the Earth station, Darian slept 8 hours. He woke up, made coffee, real coffee, from actual beans, one of approximately 11 luxuries he traveled with, and sat at his desk and read for 2 hours. Not diplomatic files. A book. A history of water infrastructure in ancient human civilizations, which he found genuinely interesting in ways he had stopped trying to explain to people. His communications queue had 43 messages. He answered 4 of them. The 4 were administrative supply scheduling, a report from his attaché about the return of the treaty documents, which had been formally couriered back to the station by a junior Kethal functionary with no accompanying note, and 1 message from Earth's Foreign Affairs Department asking for a preliminary status update. He replied to that last one in 2 sentences. Session concluded without agreement. Monitoring developments. He did not reply to the 11 discrete inquiries from other species. Not yet. Not because he was angry or calculating a dramatic pause. He simply had nothing to say yet. Silence as a response was only meaningful when the other party was uncertain what it meant. 11 species reaching out quietly meant they were already drawing their own conclusions. Adding words would only reduce the signal. He read another chapter about aqueducts. By the end of the 2nd day, the number was 17. Dorath put the list in front of Severath at her morning briefing. She looked at it. Her face did not change in any way that a stranger would notice. Dorath had watched her face for 2 years, and he noticed. These are all observation credential holders, she said. Yes. They contacted Earth, informally. All within 48 hours of our session. She set the list down on the table between them. Her hand stayed on it for a moment, fingers flat against the paper. What are they asking Earth for? Nothing specific, Dorath said. That is the detail I would ask you to sit with, Majesty. None of them are asking for anything specific. They are simply making contact. She looked at him. He looked back. He planned this, she said. It was not quite a question. Dorath thought about the document case, resting on the floor, held at a pickup angle. I think, he said carefully, that he prepared for it. The distinction sat in the air between them. Severath looked at the list again. 17 species. All of them watching. All of them now, quietly, in conversation with a man who was reading a book on a station 3 hours away and had not said a single word in public since walking out of her hall. Outside the window, the city moved. Ships came and went in the upper atmosphere. Trade traffic, mostly, running along the navigational relay corridors that kept the sector functioning. She did not look at the ships, but she was aware of them in a way she had not been 48 hours ago. Something had changed. She was not yet certain how much. The functionary's name was Avon Sell. He was 24 years old, junior enough to be deniable, senior enough to be credible, and he had been chosen for exactly that balance. He had received his instructions from Dorath directly, which was itself an unusual thing. Most functionaries at his level received instructions from their department heads. Being spoken to by the High Arbiter personally had made his hands cold for approximately 6 hours. The instructions were simple. Travel to the Earth Station. Deliver an informal invitation to resume dialogue. Observe the ambassador. Report back everything. Not just what was said. Everything. The Earth Station was not what Avon had expected. He had expected something functional and slightly apologetic. The installations of minor species tended toward the practical, even the humble, as if embarrassed by their own ambitions. He had visited 17 stations in his career, and most of them felt like waiting rooms. The Earth Station felt like a city that had decided to happen in space. It had levels, districts, a food section that smelled like nothing in his experience, and everything in his appetite. The docking port alone was busier than 3 Kethal trade hubs combined. And the ships were not all Earths. He counted 9 different species vessels in the first bay alone, being loaded and unloaded with the comfortable rhythm of somewhere that people came to regularly because they had found it reliably useful. He delivered his request through the standard liaison channel. Within 2 hours, he received a response. The ambassador would see him. Darian Voss met him in a small room off the station's main diplomatic corridor. Not an office, a sitting room. There were 2 chairs, and a low table, and a window that looked out over the docking bays. The light was warm. The room was quiet. The tea was on the table when Avon arrived. Kethal tea. The real kind, the slow-brewed Highland variety, that took 6 months to import because the leaf had to travel cold and in sealed containers. And most shipping companies didn't bother because the margin was too thin. It was in a plain pot. 2 plain cups. Avon sat down. Darian sat across from him and poured both cups and said nothing, because there was nothing yet that needed saying. Avon delivered the invitation, formal in its phrasing, informal in its channel, an acknowledgement that the court wished to revisit the earlier session and explore whether conditions existed for a renewed dialogue. He used the precise language Dorath had given him. He delivered it without flinching, because he was good at his job. Darian listened to all of it. He drank his tea. Avon noticed he drank it the Kethal way, no additions, cooled to the right temperature, both hands on the cup, not performed. Just how he drank it. When the invitation was finished, Darian set his cup down gently and said, "Please thank High Arbiter Dorath for the care he took with this. Not the Queen. Dorath." Avon filed that away. "Earth is grateful for the gesture," Darian continued. "Unfortunately, I'm not in a position to accept at this time. Not times unable. Not times restricted. Not in a position." The construction placed the limitation inside himself. A choice, not a constraint. "May I ask," Avon said carefully, "if there is a condition under which Earth would consider returning to dialogue?" Darian looked at him. His eyes were the color of something that had been dark once and settled into gray. "The proposal I presented is still the proposal," he said. "It hasn't changed. When the court is ready to discuss it, we're ready to discuss it. The same document, the same terms. Nothing added, nothing removed, nothing punitive layered on top." Avon had expected anger, or leverage, or a counter-demand. He had prepared for those things. He had no framework for the original offer sitting completely unchanged on the table, as if the last week had simply not occurred. "I'll also mention," Darian said, still in the same even voice, "the same way you mention a thing when handing someone a coat, that Earth has entered preliminary discussions with the Tharvan Consortium regarding the navigational relay contracts currently held under Kethal preference pricing." Avon's training kept his face where it was. The relay contracts. The Kethal preference pricing was a legacy arrangement. Kethal ships used Earth's relay network at a significant discount, formalized in an agreement signed 19 years ago, when Earth's infrastructure was new and the Kethal's credentialing was worth more than the fee. It had been, for 19 years, invisible. The kind of line item that nobody looked at because the system worked, and there was no reason to look. The Tharvan Consortium was the second largest shipping operation in the sector. They had been in a quiet territorial dispute with the Kethal for 11 years. If they absorbed the relay contracts, preliminary discussions, Darian said again, softly, the way you clarify something you don't want misunderstood. Nothing is finalized. Nothing is finalized. The two most expensive words Avon had ever heard. He sat with them for a moment. "I understand," he said. "Because what else was there to say?" Darian nodded. He refilled Avon's cup without asking. They sat for a few minutes more. They talked about the station, its history, its construction, a particular engineering problem in the third docking bay that had taken 2 years to solve. Darian was genuinely interested in the engineering problem. He asked 2 follow-up questions that suggested he understood the mechanics. He was not performing warmth. He was just warm. That was the unsettling part. Avon left with a full transcript in his recorder, and a taste of Kethal tea in his mouth, and the specific feeling of a man who had gone somewhere, expecting to deliver a message, and had instead received one. Dorath read the transcript 3 times. Then he went to Severath. She read it once, which meant she had understood it on the first pass, which was one of the things about her that he genuinely admired even now. She set it down. "The relay contracts," she said. "Yes." He mentioned them to a junior functionary. "Yes." She looked at him. "Why not to me? Why not in a formal communication? Why tell someone who—" She stopped. She had answered her own question before she finished asking it, because telling her formally would make it a threat. Telling a junior functionary made it a weather report, a fact about the world that was neither directed at her nor designed to wound her just true, and now in the record, delivered in the most casual possible way over Kethal tea, a threat you could respond to. A weather report you simply had to prepare for. "He's not angry," she said. "No," Dorath agreed. "He was never angry." "No." She stood up and walked to the window. The city was busy below. Ships moved in the upper atmosphere. Trade traffic, relay traffic, the constant movement of a civilization that ran on infrastructure it did not own. How long has Earth had the relay contracts? 19 years. How long before we noticed them? Dorath said nothing. The answer was 1 week ago, and they both knew it. She stood at the window for a long time, not performing anything, just standing there, being 26 years old in a crown she had worn for 11 months, watching ships move along corridors that ran on someone else's pipes. "Get me the full infrastructure registry," she said finally. "I already have it," Dorath said, and set it on her desk. She looked at the thickness of it. She sat down. She began to read. She called him herself. No functionary. No intermediary. No layer of deniable protocol between the request and the person making it. Severath opened a direct encrypted channel to the Earth station and sent a personal connection request under her own credentials, which, in the history of the Kethal Imperial Crown, had never once been done for a diplomat of any rank, let alone one who had walked out of her hall. Dorath, when she told him, went very quiet. "Is that a mistake?" she asked. "It is a statement," he said. "Make sure you intend the one you're making." She sent it anyway. Darian accepted within the hour. He appeared on screen in the same dark suit. Or possibly a different one, they were all the same, which she was beginning to understand was a choice. He was at his desk. Behind him was a bookshelf, with the kind of organized disorder that meant someone actually used it. There was a cup of something at his elbow. He looked like a man who had been working and had simply stopped to take a call. "Ambassador," she said. "Your Majesty," he said. The titles sat there for a moment. Then she moved past them. "I read the infrastructure registry. It's thorough," he said. "It took me 4 days." He didn't say anything to that. He didn't perform modesty or satisfaction. He just waited to hear what she had concluded. She had concluded quite a lot. 6 sectors, 41 relay stations, 23 of them critical junctions, the kind where removing the station from the network would mean ships rerouting by days, not hours. Communication infrastructure, threading through every trade corridor that mattered. Maintenance contracts held under Earth authorization. Upgrade schedules managed by Earth's technical teams. The entire invisible skeleton of how this region of space functioned, day to day, ship to ship, and Earth had built it in 30 years. Quietly, practically. While everyone else was arguing about borders. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to answer it plainly." "I'll try. What do you actually want?" He looked at her, not guarded thinking, the look of a man checking that the answer in his head matches the one he intends to say. "The same thing I came to discuss 3 weeks ago," he said. "The treaty as written. Mutual development rights in the secondary corridor systems. Navigational cooperation agreements. Formalized rate structures for the relay contracts rather than the legacy pricing arrangement." He paused. "Standard partnership terms between 2 civilizations that are going to be neighbors for a long time." She let the silence sit. "That's it?" "That's it. Nothing additional. Nothing punitive. No revised terms accounting for..." She didn't finish the sentence. "For the insult?" he said. The word in the room, plain and flat. "Yes," she said. He picked up his cup and drank from it and set it back down. "No. The terms haven't changed. They were fair before. They're fair now." She looked at him for a long moment. She had been trying since the day he left her hall to find the anger. She was good at reading anger. It was the thing underneath most diplomatic behavior, the engine behind positions and demands, and the specific pride-shaped weight that made negotiations run long. She had spent 11 months on the throne learning to read it in every species she dealt with. She could not find it in him. "That's what I don't understand," she said. "What?" "You're not angry." "No. You should be." "Should I?" He tilted his head slightly. Not challenging. Genuinely curious about her reasoning. "I insulted you in front of 43 species. On the record. In the old tongue. You're a diplomat. Your reputation is currency. I spent it in public." "You did," he agreed. "And you're sitting there telling me the original offer still stands?" "It does." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. Not deflecting, actually considering how to say the next thing accurately. "Because the offer was never about my feelings," he said. "It was about the relay network, and the corridor development, and what kind of working relationship Earth and the Kethal have for the next 100 years. None of that changed, because you called me times Vethalan times, in front of a room full of people." She held that. "The insult didn't cost you anything," she said slowly. "You needed me to do it." He didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. He looked at her with the expression of a man who is comfortable with a question staying in the air. But she had already answered it herself. She had been running it back for days, laying the sequence out in order. He had arrived with an offer any informed party would recognize as fair. He had presented it correctly, professionally, without excess. She had needed, for domestic political reasons, to demonstrate strength, and the easiest available demonstration was to dismiss him publicly. She had done so, permanently, on the record, witnessed by 43 species. And then he had left. Not fought, not protested, not filed a formal grievance. Left. Which had placed the moral position clearly, undeniably, in a document that 43 species now held copies of, on Earth's side of the table. And then the relay contract question had arisen, and 17 species had contacted his station, and the Tharvan Consortium had received a phone call. All of it entirely within protocol. All of it legally clean. All of it the natural consequence of a wronged party quietly doing business elsewhere. She had handed him the floor. He had simply walked onto it. "You came here knowing I would do that," she said. He was quiet. You studied me, she said. You read the political assessments. You knew about the noble houses. You knew I was 11 months in and needed to demonstrate I wasn't soft. She could hear the shape of it now, all of it. You didn't come here to get the treaty signed on day one. You came here to get insulted on the record and then leave with the moral ground. The silence confirmed it more clearly than his voice would have. That's cold, she said. It's patient, he said quietly. The distinction arrived in her like something that had been traveling a long distance and finally stopped. She looked at him across the encrypted channel. 31 years old, undecorated. Dark suit. Cup of something at his elbow. How long does Earth think in? She asked. Decades, mostly, he said. Sometimes centuries when the question is worth it. She thought about the relay network. 30 years of quiet construction. 30 years of being the pipes instead of the flag. We think in dynasties, she said. I know, he said. That's one of the things I respect about you. She almost laughed. Not amusement, something more complicated. The laugh of a person who has just understood a thing and found the understanding unexpectedly clean. I owe you an apology, she said. You owe me a signed treaty, he said. That's more useful. She looked at him for one more moment. Then, when can you come back? When would you like me? Next week, she said. Formal session. Full court. He nodded. Bring the same document, she said. I still have it, he said. Of course he did. She had never doubted that he did. The document had always been available. She was the variable that had needed to change. She closed the channel. She sat in her office for a while without moving. Outside, the city ran. Ships moved in the relays. The infrastructure held everything up, the way infrastructure always did, invisibly, reliably, without drama, until you looked directly at it. She thought about 30 years of quiet construction. She thought about a man who had walked into her hall carrying a document case at a pickup angle. She thought about patience not as a virtue, but as a strategy. Not as waiting, but as the longest kind of working. The kind that builds roads while everyone else argues about the map. She had 4,000 years of dynasty behind her. She had 11 months of reign in front of her. She began, for the first time, to understand the difference between those two things. The hall had been dressed for significance. That was Severath's word for it when she approved the ceremony arrangements significant. Not triumphant, not celebratory. Significant. Doreth had noticed the word choice and said nothing, which was his way of noting that she had chosen correctly. The banners were formal, white and deep blue. Kethal ceremonial colors for agreements of long standing. The colors of something meant to last. The columns were lit from below. The observation gallery above the chamber floor had been opened for the first time in 6 years, and it was full. 14 species with formal observer credentials. 12 more with informal ones. Every camera in the system was running. The court was assembled in its full formal configuration. Every noble house represented. Every senior administrator present. Every position filled. This was not the ordinary diplomatic arrangement. This was the Kethal Imperial Court, at the full expression of its 4,000-year weight. Severath had designed it that way deliberately. If this was going to be in the record, and it was going to be in the record forever, then it was going to be in the record correctly. No minimizing. No quietly signed in a side office arrangement that let everyone pretend the last 3 weeks had been a minor procedural delay. The full court. The full record. The full weight of the thing placed exactly where it belonged. Doreth had asked her, the night before, if she was certain. She had said yes. He had nodded and gone to arrange the banners. Darian arrived on time. Not early. Not late. On time. To the minute. Which in Kethal protocol was its own statement. It meant you respected the occasion without requiring it to accommodate you. He wore the same dark suit. Or the same kind. It had never mattered, and still didn't. He had one attaché with him. One. The first session he had arrived with 2, and a full documentation team. Today he had one person carrying one case, and the reduction was noticed by everyone in the room who understood how these things worked. He did not need the backup. He already knew what was going to happen. He crossed the floor. The footsteps again, the same floor, The same distance, the same acoustics carrying the sound of a single person walking through a civilization's worth of silence. 200 meters. He had walked it once before and kept walking out the other side. He walked it now and stopped at the mark. He looked up. Severath was on the throne. Same posture. Same stillness. But she was wearing the court's deep blue alongside the ceremonial white, now white and blue together. The first-year queen stepping into the colors of permanence. Dorath had told her it was premature by traditional protocol. She had told him to order the blue anyway. They looked at each other across the hall. No insult this time. No performance for the noble houses. The noble houses were here to watch something else entirely now, and they knew it. The court announcer began the formal opening. It ran its usual length, filling the air with the sound of its own importance. And this time Darian let it settle over him without measuring it. He had time. He had always had time. That had been the entire point. When the announcer finished, Severath rose. This was not in the standard protocol. The signing of an agreement did not require the queen to stand. She could remain seated, as was tradition, as every queen before her had done. She stood anyway. "The Kethel Imperial Court," she said, in High Kethel, and the translation piece rendered it clean, "acknowledges the treaty proposal presented by Ambassador Darian Voss of Earth, on behalf of Earth's 31 charter systems. Standard language." Then she paused. "The court further acknowledges," she said, and now the language was not standard. Now she was departing from the script in a way that made 3 senior administrators very quietly reach for their record devices, that at the previous session, Earth's representative conducted himself with times Vethokara. The word landed. Vethokara, the old tongue. The same register she had used 3 weeks ago to deliver the insult. The same ceremonial weight. The same recorded permanence. Now running in the opposite direction. It meant, roughly translated, one who carries weight in stillness. It was the highest honorific in the Kethal protocol language. It had been given 9 times in 400 years. It was not given lightly. It was not given performatively. It was given when the record demanded it, when something had occurred that the record would hold regardless. And the only question was whether the Kethal crown would acknowledge it, or let the history stand as an omission. She was not giving it because she wanted to. She was giving it because it was true, and she had decided, somewhere in the 4 days she spent reading the infrastructure registry, that truth in the record was worth more than comfort in the moment. Several things happened simultaneously in the observation gallery above. 14 species representatives began writing very quickly. Darian bowed. The correct depth, the correct duration. The same bow he had offered at the start of the first session, unchanged, as if the weeks between had not occurred. The signing took 11 minutes. Both copies. Both seals. Every clause initialed. Every schedule attached. The treaty, as written, the same document that had sat on the presentation, stand for 45 seconds, 3 weeks ago, before he picked up his case. Not one word changed. The relay contracts, formalized. The corridor development rights, established. The preference pricing, restructured into a fair bilateral rate. Standard partnership terms. The kind that compounded quietly over decades into something neither party would want to unwind. The Tharvan Consortium would not be receiving the relay contracts. That conversation had never been finalized. It had only ever needed to be started. When the signing was done, the court moved through its closing ceremony. The formal witness statements, the record sealing, the announcement protocols. All of it ran correctly. All of it was correct. The machine of 4,000 years of civilization doing what 4,000 years of civilization was built to do. Severath watched it and felt, for the first time in her 11-month reign, the specific weight of a thing that had been done properly. Not easily. Properly. After the gallery had cleared and the court had dispersed, and the administrative teams had taken the documents away to be processed and distributed, Dorath found Darian at the window on the hall's east side. The window looked out over the city, its towers, its transit lines, the ships moving in the upper atmosphere, the visible fact of a civilization in motion. Darian was watching the ships. "Ambassador," Dorath said. "High Arbiter." They stood together for a moment. 2 men who had been on opposite sides of 3 weeks of slow, quiet pressure, looking at the same view. The Tharvan discussions, Dorath said. Were they real? Preliminary, Darian said. Which was what he had told the functionary. Which was not a yes, and not a no. Dorath accepted this. The Queen, he said carefully. Read the infrastructure registry in 4 days, the full document. I know, Darian said. He sounded like a man who had expected this, and found it confirmed a good opinion. She understood it. I expected she would. Dorath looked at him sideways. You expected it. She's been on the throne 11 months, Darian said. She's politically exposed, brilliant, and in a hurry. That's a combination that makes mistakes in the short run and learns from them faster than anyone else. I wouldn't have brought the offer here if I thought she wasn't capable of getting to yes. Dorath was quiet for a moment. You needed her to insult you, he said. It was not quite a question. He had been turning it over since the day the doors closed. He was certain now. Darian drank his tea. He had, somehow, a cup again. Dorath was no longer surprised by this and said nothing, which was its own answer. Was any of it personal? Dorath asked. Any part of it? Darian considered this with genuine care, the way he considered most things. The tea, he said finally. The tea was personal. I genuinely like Kethal tea. Dorath looked at him. Then, for the first time in the presence of a foreign diplomat in 40 years of service, he laughed. A short, dry, real thing that surprised him slightly on the way out. Darian smiled. Not large, just present. Outside, the ships moved along the relay corridors. The infrastructure held everything up, the way it always had, the way it would continue to do for the next 100 years, under terms that were now formal, legal, and fair. 3 weeks ago, a queen had spoken in the old tongue and aimed a single sentence at a man who was carrying a document case at a pickup angle. She had aimed it correctly. She had simply not understood, until it was over, that the target she gave him was the one he needed. He had answered her in a language older than the old tongue, older than dynasties, older than ceremony and record and the carved stone columns of 4,000-year halls. The language of leaving and returning, and knowing exactly which one to do and when. The treaty was signed. The ships moved. The relay held. And in the morning, Darian Voss would board his shuttle, drink his coffee, and begin reading about aqueducts again, because the work was done. And the work had always been the point, and some things did not need to be dramatic to be permanent.